Thank you, Graham. Yes, my name's Chris Gotham. When I lived in the UK, which is where I'm from originally, I was called Chris Gotham, like the cricketer Ian Botham, but here I'm called Gotham. I've since given up trying to call myself Gotham. Obviously I get called Batman from time to time. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'll give you a brief introduction about Beyond Blue and about anxiety and depression, which, as you know, is what Beyond Blue is all about. I'll give you a few quotes about what it's like to have depression. I'll talk a little bit about depression in radical prostatectomy patients. I myself have had a radical prostatectomy in 2009, and I'll talk a little bit about that and my current situation with that. I'll tell you my story, my history of depression, talk to you about treatment and recovery, and then a few words of conclusion. So I'm an ambassador for Beyond Blue, the National Depression Initiative. Beyond Blue is an independent, not-for-profit organisation working to address issues associated with depression and anxiety in Australia. The organisation's key aims are raising awareness about depression and anxiety, reducing associated stigma, and encouraging people to seek help early. The figures on depression and anxiety are quite staggering. And I'll just quote you one or two of the statistics just to put it into context. Today in Australia, more than 1 million people are suffering depression, and more than 2 million are suffering some sort of anxiety condition. We know that 1 in 6 women and 1 in 8 men will experience depression at some time in their lives. And when we talk about anxiety, it's 1 in 3 women and 1 in 5 men. If you look around the room at everybody gathered here today, many of you will probably experience depression and anxiety sometime during your lives, or somebody in your family may also experience depression or anxiety. Mental health conditions don't discriminate. They affect people of every age, at every stage of life. Just because you're rich, or you're in a good job, or you're from a great family and you've been brought up in a happy household, it doesn't mean you won't get depression. It's more than just a low mood. It's a serious illness that has an impact on both physical and mental health. Anxiety is a different thing, although the two conditions are associated. But anxiety is more than just feeling stressed or worried. While stress and anxious feelings are a common response to a situation where a person feels under pressure, it usually passes once the stressful situation has passed or the stressor has been removed. Anxiety is when these feelings don't subside. It's when they're ongoing and exist without any particular reason or cause. It's a serious condition, and it makes it very difficult for a person to cope with daily life. A person may be experiencing an anxiety condition if he or she feels very worried or anxious most of the time and finds it difficult to calm down. People experiencing an anxiety disorder feel overwhelmed or frightened by sudden feelings of intense panic and anxiety. They also experience recurring thoughts which contribute to anxiety, which may seem silly to others. I have a personal history of depression, which is why I became an ambassador for Beyond Blue. And tonight I'm going to share my story with you as part of my objective of increasing community understanding of mental health. Now, I just want to give you this quote, which is from a Professor Lewis Wolpert. I've no idea who he is, but he's a professor, so he must be a pretty smart guy. And it's a quote about what it's like to have depression. I'll read it to you. "It was the worst experience of my life, more terrible even than watching my wife die of cancer. I am ashamed to say that my depression felt worse than her death, but it's true. I was in a state that bore no resemblance to anything I had experienced before." I can relate to those words. A couple of times I was very, very ill. Many famous people have suffered depression, and I'm sure you've heard of them. Winston Churchill, he used to call it his black dog. Dawn Fraser, Prince Charles, Gary MacDonald, Mozart, Spike Milligan, and of course, most recently, Robin Williams, who tragically took his own life last year because he was so severely depressed. Depression in radical prostatectomy patients. I don't have any information on the incidence of depression in patients who've had radical prostate surgery. I myself have had it. It hasn't caused me any depression or anxiety, but it can. And why can it? I would suggest because of the potential problems such as incontinence, sexual dysfunction, which can manifest post-surgery. So it's quite conceivable that some patients will suffer some mental health conditions. My radical prostatectomy was in November 2009. It was very successful in the sense that I suffered no incontinence and only minimal sexual dysfunction. But in the last 4 years, my PSA reading has started to go up, and it's gone from 0.01, which it was for probably about the first 3 years, and then 0.02, and now it's 0.12. And last week I was telling some of the guys here, I saw Professor Andrew Kneebone, who's a radiation oncologist, to see what I should do about this situation. He basically told me to go away until it reached 0.24, and then I will have another one of these PSMA tests, which is a new test, which more precisely identifies the location of any residual cancer. So I'm now back on the old grind of quarterly PSA tests. It causes me quite a bit of anxiety when I'm coming up for the test and waiting for the doctor to speak to me to tell me what the latest reading has been. So I don't think it's causing me anxiety in the sense of that term that I described earlier, but it's always there at the back of your mind, and I'm sure a number of you will be familiar with that situation, both husbands and wives, I dare say. So I'm not going to make any further specific reference to prostate surgery in the context of depression and anxiety, because that's outside my terms of reference for this talk. I'm going to tell you the story of my history of depression and how I've recovered to have a successful career and a happy life. So, the first time I got depression was in my mid-30s. I'm a chartered accountant, and I had worked from the time I qualified. I'd worked in Libya for 3 years with a firm of chartered accountants, and then I went to Kenya with an English manufacturing company as their financial controller. And then I went back to Libya to work for a former client, a major oil company. And when I got back to the UK, that's when it hit me. And I just returned from working in Tripoli in Libya. You might say, well, why the hell would you go and work there? But it was actually quite pleasant in those days. It's a bit of a shambles now. So I'd had no previous history of depression, although I did know my sister had had it, but she lived in America, so she wasn't really too much use to me. And I was going through a massive change in my life, a new job, a new city, a new house, new schools for my 3 children, and I didn't know what was happening to me because I'd never had it before. I experienced early morning waking, inability to concentrate at work, and feeling that I couldn't do the things I used to do. And that was particularly distressing at work, where I felt almost totally incapacitated and thought I was losing my mind. I also had no interest in doing the things I enjoy. I'm a very keen golfer, but I had to really force myself to play golf. So I had this whole experience engendered a real sense of desperation. So I knew something was wrong, but I'd never experienced it before, so I didn't know what it was. I just thought I was going crazy. I went to the doctor, my GP. At that time I was living near Southampton, on the south coast of the UK. And he told me I had depression. He prescribed these antidepressants. So this was the early 70s. And the antidepressants they prescribed in those days were horrendous. They made you feel like an absolute zombie. Horrible side effects. Like, I was like this. I couldn't hold a cup of tea. I had this terrible dryness in my mouth. Today's antidepressants, by comparison, are terrific. They're much more patient-friendly. Anyway, I persevered with the with the medication, despite feeling awful. And after about 3 weeks, it was quite remarkable. I started to see light at the end of the tunnel. All of a sudden, I got up one morning and something clicked, and I thought, this is going to be okay, I think. And the momentum of recovery was incredibly quick. And after about 6 weeks on the medication, I felt I was back to normal. I had renewed enthusiasm for life, started playing tennis and golf again, and I embarked on a second accounting qualification. So what did I learn from this? This first episode taught me awareness and recognition of the symptoms, and a realization that help was available and it's very effective in treating the condition. Also taught me that it's very important to seek help as soon as possible after symptoms become evident. I think it's indicative of attitudes at the time that I never considered telling my employer about my depression, because I believed that such disclosure would put my career at risk. So the only people who I confided in were my family and my doctor. My close friends knew nothing about it. Fortunately, we're now living in a different era where there is much greater awareness of depression and the available treatment regimes for the condition. Media exposure has highlighted the importance of talking about depression and the therapeutic benefits that such conversation provide for people suffering depression. However, having said all that, I'll relate a story about a company that I worked for 11 years, from the early 90s to the early 2000s. I was the chief financial officer of this company, which was a major listed entertainment company in the business of cinemas and hotels and ski resorts. And we had a company secretary who joined the company. And after about 2 or 3 months with the company, he became depressed and had to go off work. After about 6 weeks, he came back, and then he had to go off work again. And the second time he went off work, he was told not to bother coming back. So, you know, it's still happening in this day and age, this discrimination. Now this guy, you know, he was a very capable guy. He was just sick. And I don't know what happened to his career after that, and I know some employers are more in tune with mental health conditions than other employers. And of course at the time I was greatly distressed about the way that the company I'd been with for so long had treated this guy. I thought it was shameful. But that's the stigma that still exists. It's a lot better, but it still exists. Okay, I'll talk now a little bit about treatment and recovery. So I've been very fortunate. I've had, as I said a few minutes ago, I've had about 5 major episodes of depression. From my mid-30s, I'm now 75. I haven't had any episodes now for the last 12 years. So it happened from my mid-30s to my early 60s. The time frame of recovery for me has usually been fairly short, except for one occasion in the early 90s when I had to be hospitalized about a month. I had a double whammy that year when I went through a redundancy and a divorce in 1 year. For me, the warning signs of the onset of depression are very apparent. Early waking, inability to get back to sleep, loss of concentration and enthusiasm, a very rapid decline in mood. So after the first occasion, when as I said a few minutes ago, when I knew there was something wrong but I didn't know what it was, every time it happened to me since then, I knew immediately what it was. Immediately. And for me, and everybody's experience is different, once the symptoms became apparent, the escalation in my condition was incredibly rapid. So I could go from being a normal functioning individual to somebody almost unrecognizable in terms of mood and demeanor in a very short space of time. But my crutch, if you like, over the years has been medication. That's worked for me. There are a lot of other treatments for depression, like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. In extreme conditions, people are given electric shock treatment, which is a lot gentler these days than it used to be. And some people are unlucky. They don't respond to antidepressants. But I have always been very fortunate in responding to them and never suffering a relapse during my treatment. So as I said, I've not suffered an episode for 12 years, which may be because I'm now retired, play a lot of golf, happily married, and no longer have to deal with a very difficult boss or have the stresses of a management position. And I do a lot of travel and play golf, tennis and cycling. So, in conclusion, I guess the emotion that I would like you to take away from this talk is one of hope. If you've had depression or you know anybody in your family or amongst your circle of friends that's suffered depression or anxiety, they are common conditions and they're very treatable. A common misconception is that people with depression or anxiety can just snap out of it. I can well remember my father, I'll never forget this. We were living in Southampton. We just got back to the UK, as I said, from Libya. And we just bought this house, and my mother and father came down to see us. And my father said to me, "Well, Chris, you'll just have to snap out of it." And that was obviously, that wasn't meant in any cruel sort of way. It was really him not understanding what depression is all about. There is more understanding now, but at that time there wasn't. So that was his response to my condition, which wasn't terribly helpful, but you know, he was a logical thinker, so that's what he thought. So support is available, and it's important to seek support early. The sooner the better. With the right treatment, most people recover. It's important to know the signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety so you can monitor feelings and behaviours, and also look out for those around you. Before I retired and I was concerned about my career, I would never talk about depression, never talk about my experience. Now I do, and you know, even at my golf club, I don't stand up and broadcast that I've had a history of depression, but I do talk a little bit about Beyond Blue from time to time, if the subject comes up. And sometimes I'll see somebody who is not right, somebody who I've known for a number of years. There's one guy in particular who I was chatting to tonight, and he was made redundant at the age of 52. He's now 55. He's a highly intelligent guy. He's done a master's at an Ivy League school in the US, and he hasn't been able to get a job. And at one time I said to him, "Matt, you know, mate, if you ever are feeling down and you want to talk to somebody, I'm here for you." So that's what I feel I can do now. You know, I don't want to be intrusive, but I think it is something I can do if I see somebody who I know well, who is obviously going through a tough time. In my experience of depression, there were times when it would have been easy to give in to my illness and retreat into a less stressful lifestyle. It's not what I wanted, but for some people it could be the right response to the condition. I have a daughter who's now in her mid-40s who has suffered some anxiety and depression over the years, and her way of dealing with this is, she's married with a child, her way of dealing with this is to take stress out of her life to the maximum extent she can. So the career that she was on as a physiotherapist, she gave that up, and she's now gone into something less stressful, simply because that's her way of dealing with it, and that's okay. So, in closing, if you want to know anything more about depression or anxiety, the Beyond Blue website is full of very useful information. They have a 24-hour helpline which operates 7 days a week and is staffed by clinical staff who can help you access information about mental health conditions, can provide resources and locate practitioners in your area who have expertise in treating mental health conditions. So thank you all for listening to my story. I encourage you to support Beyond Blue in any way you feel is appropriate, and I'd be happy to attempt to answer any questions. I'm not a clinician, so if anybody has any questions, please fire away.
You haven't had depression for many years, so you're not on any medication at all for depression?
Yes, I am.
You still are, you?
Yes, the psychiatrist that I used to go to strongly recommended that I stay on what's called a maintenance dose of an antidepressant. So I take an antidepressant called Lexapro. I take 10 milligrams a day, which is the minimum dose you can take. Sometimes I think I should come off it, but you know, depression runs in my family. My other daughter is on antidepressants. My sister has taken antidepressants for longer than I have. So it is a genetic condition, I believe. So to answer your question, yes, I am on a minimal dose, and it doesn't cause me any side effects really. So I'll continue to do that if that's the advice from the medical profession.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I was just wondering, you said that you play golf, play tennis and cycling, so you're obviously keeping pretty fit. Do you think the idea of physical fitness has any bearing on how bad, or whether in relation to the depression? Can you relate it to some of these footballers around now, very fit people, but you still see a bit of publicity about some of these more well-known footballers that are dealing with that issue. So I'm just wondering whether, from your opinion, do you think that physical fitness has anything to do with it? Or
I'd say that physical fitness doesn't mean that you're immune from this condition, as has been evidenced by the footballers. But I think being fit certainly helps the process of recovery. And I think in the case of the footballers, there are a number of well-known footballers who've suffered mental health conditions during their career. The media is very reticent to deliver any specific information about it, but reading between the lines, I'd say Adam Goodes definitely had depression, Buddy Franklin, and there's a number of rugby league players. The main time it hits them is when they give up their career, and all the adoration that they've been used to suddenly disappears. Some of them don't have any career to fall back on, and so, you know, they've gone from this life of being idolized by the public and by the fans of their club to being a nobody, and that's very tough for some people to deal with unless they have a career to fall back on. So if you take John Eales, the former Wallabies captain, you know, he was obviously a very bright guy, and he had a career to fall back on. So they're okay, but a lot of these rugby league players really have had very, and I'm not meaning to be disparaging towards rugby league players, but I see it myself. I'm a Premier League soccer fan, and my team is Stoke City, and we always will be. They're in the Premier League. They're never going to do anything special in the Premier League, but that's where I'm from. And I went with my dad from the age of about 7, you know, and it's always the team I've supported. So, yeah, when some of these guys retire from their sport, they just don't know what to do with themselves, and they can, you know, there's a lot of evidence of them suffering from mental health conditions, and they often turn to booze, because that's the first thing a lot of men turn to. And then they, you know, they'll go out on a bender because it'll make them feel better. But then they wake up the next morning and they feel even worse than they did the day before. Yeah.
Chris, John Brogdon, he was a sufferer from depression, wasn't
Yes,
he?
he was.
I remember he speaking to us a few years ago. He gave a wonderful address. Have you met John? And
No, I haven't met John,
Yeah,
no.
I've never met him.
No.
I think he's still involved, is he not, in supporting of your institution? Is he not?
I'm not sure he is. He has another career now, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He supports Lifeline.
Lifeline, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. And there's another organisation called the Black Dog. I've never understood. Beyond Blue is Melbourne-based, although they're Australia-wide. The Black Dog is Sydney-based. They both do essentially the same thing. I don't know why they don't get together, but they don't. But no, I haven't met John. I would like to, but I haven't. I met Jeff Kennett. I had lunch. I sat next to Jeff Kennett at a lunch a year or so ago, and he's a very impressive individual, let me tell you. We could do with a few politicians like him today, I think. Yeah.
That seems to be all, Chris. One more?
Cutting me off quickly. I just wanted to ask, not in your opinion, but the thought occurred to me that very often, particularly with prostate cancer or any cancers, the immediate feeling is fix it, get rid of it, or you know. Is there a stage where you think, I mean, look, if you belong to a really great hospital that have a good cancer support service, i.e. the Sun or something, that's fine. And I know a lot of other hospitals also offer that. But is it, or should it be part of the awareness of our specialists to look out for cases of depression, or are they generally so centred on what they do best, which is hopefully doing the prognosis and hopefully getting you back on track, as it were?
Well,
they actually don't think about it very much.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question, and I think that certainly the specialists who are treating prostate cancer patients, it would be extremely helpful for them to have this awareness that it is possible that as a result of being diagnosed or as a result of the after effects of side effects of treatment, that patients can become depressed. And I think any surgeon or oncologist who is treating a patient would be very helpful for them to have an awareness about this potential condition and to be able to at least advise their patients to seek help. I think that's a very good point. It's something I've never thought about.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chris, do you know if any work has been done to try and discover whether it really is genetically passed on from one generation to the other, or?
I don't know of anything specific, no, and as I said, I'm not a clinician. I think it's generally accepted that there is a genetic connection. I mean, you know, if I look back at my grandparents and my parents, in when they were alive, depression was something that really nobody really knew much about. The treatments were horrendous. My sister and I both believe it's quite possible my father was depressed in his later life, particularly when he lost my mother. I think if I look at my own family, as I've got 3 children, 2 of them have had depression and 1 is on antidepressants permanently, like me. as is my sister. And you see that in other families. And so the logical conclusion is that there is a genetic link. I'm not aware of any research that's been done.
I just wondered whether there was any.
No,
work being
and it
done.
would be very interesting to know. I haven't read anything on the Beyond Blue website about it, but I feel that there is, because there's nothing really in my life. If I look back, I mean, I wasn't, badly treated as a child or abused or the sort of things that we've heard about, in the Catholic Church of these young kids being abused. I mean, you can imagine that would be a trigger for depression later in life. I've had none of that. I've had I've had my ups and downs, as we all have at our age. But I've had a fairly good life in that sense. So there's no reason why I should have had it, but I did.
As an ambassador for Beyond Blue, do you have a program of talking to groups, or how do you sort of act as an ambassador?
The way it works is that I get a request from Beyond Blue, which is the way it works is a group like yours will submit a request to Beyond Blue to provide a speaker. Beyond Blue will then contact an ambassador like me, and I'll always try and agree to talk if it's convenient for me. I probably do half a dozen a year, I suppose. I'm doing one. I'm going away next week for 7 weeks, but when I get back, I'm doing one in Epping in August to a group. But it's nice to have a group that's where I get some engagement, like you guys tonight, because sometimes I'll deliver a talk and I'll get no questions at all, and I say to myself, "Oh God, my presentation skills tonight must have been awful." Yeah, so.
That seems to be all, Chris. It's my duty tonight to move a vote of thanks to you. Thanks for coming along and giving up your time to speak with us. You're to be congratulated for being an ambassador for such a good cause, and you gave a wonderful address, and it was great to hear of your own life experiences. And I learned a lot from tonight, and sometimes you wonder yourself whether you've got depression after you talk about things like tonight, but because you get those moments. But anyhow, thanks a lot. It was very enlightening, and I'd like everyone... Big pardon? Sorry.
It's been a pleasure.
Anyhow, ask everyone to move it, but with acclamation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.